सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Cut the Clutter is back to talking about Pakistan now because some data has come out on Pakistan's debt. Now you might say, as our parents told us, beta, never take debt, right? Either spend less than you earn or earn more than you spend. That is the good old mother's logic. But countries don't follow the mother's logic. Countries are sovereigns, they have their own way of functioning, and most countries take debt. Not all countries, most countries take debt, including America. America actually is a very highly indebted country, but that's a different discussion altogether. We'll come to that in some other episode. Most other countries, particularly developing and not rich countries, low income, early middle income, low middle income countries, when they take debt, the question arises, is the debt sustainable? Which means can they repay this debt with interest? Because if you can't repay your debt with interest, you know that awful consequences can visit you. It can constrain your sovereign decision-making power. You can lose your assets, as they happened with Sri Lanka and Hambantota, and has happened to many other countries who took loans from China, but other countries also. Countries take loan from IMF. IMF comes with many conditions, which are called conditionalities, which makes it very unpopular for governments that take that debt from IMF because they have to collect more taxes, they have to raise more tariffs. So debt never comes unencumbered with many onerous burdens. In Pakistan's case, however, there are many countries which are debt addicts, which are borrowing addicts. But there isn't one like Pakistan that we have seen definitely in our neighborhood. Now, there are countries in our neighborhood which in some ways might be more indebted, say, than Pakistan. And I will give you some data on those countries in our neighborhood, including India. But the important thing is that Pakistan has been consistently borrowing all the time, consistently borrowing through its history. In fact, if you want to see Pakistan's history, then since 1958, Pakistan has borrowed from IMF 23 times. And since 1988, Pakistan has gone to the IMF and got money from the IMF 14 times. The latest, that is $3 billion or earlier this year. Another one will come towards the first quarter of next year, that is 2024. So Pakistan is a borrowing addict 23 times from IMF since 1958. However, that is not the story right now. The story right now is, and the reason we are featuring it in this episode of Cut the Clutter is that a reputed think tank or research center called AidData at William and Mary at Williamsburg, Virginia. It's a very highly rated campus, academic institution. They have done a research, and this research actually is not so much about specifically about Pakistan's debt. It's about the debt that the Chinese have been handing out. See, I will share with you on your screens a screenshot of the front page of this report. I will also share a link of the report with you. You can see that report at leisure. That report is headlined Belt and Road Reboot, Beijing's bid to de-risk its global infrastructure initiative. That's because country after country is running into trouble with Belt and Roads Initiative loans. And the Chinese, while in many cases, in many countries, they've gone and repossessed the assets against which this loan was given or assets built with these loans like Hambantota, they are also now realizing that politically this is becoming a liability. So the Chinese have trouble with these loans and they are finding new ways of dealing with it. That's what this report talks about. But this report, in addition to assessing China's BRI loan de-risking, also makes some revelations about how much the Pakistanis have borrowed from China. So if you look at World Bank figures, World Bank data tells you that Pakistan has borrowed $46 billion from China. That $46 billion has generally been accepted as the correct figure. We have also used it a few times. The AidData research, on the other hand, shows this figure to be $68.91 billion, round it off, say 69 billion. That is $23 billion more than what the World Bank reckons. Now, how does that happen? We'll come to that. But before that, see some of the aging data on this. If you look at this debt, Of this 69 billion or 68.91 billion, 33 billion, that's almost half, was taken in the 3-year period between 2015 and 17. Now you could say, oh, these were the Nawaz Sharif years. And you will see a graphic on your screens saying that these were the Nawaz Sharif years. But that's also because that's the only period for which we now have definitive data available. In fact, if you look at other points of data that emerged, say coming up to 2021, you can see the same story having continued. So Pakistan has continued to borrow. In fact, if you see the Imran Khan years after that, once again, the same pattern will continue. How dependent Pakistan is on Chinese debt and Chinese support, you can also see in some other indications. For example, an important statement worth taking note of was made by Anwarullah Kakar, currently the caretaker Prime Minister of Pakistan. On a visit to Beijing on 19th of October, he said, and I quote, "We will always stand with China and trust you blindly." Now, you have no choice but to trust the other guy blindly when the other guy not only backstops you on your national security in international fora, protects also your citizens who are internationally acknowledged terrorists from being declared as such by the UN or its agencies. In fact, those fellows are only protected because the Chinese veto of sorts. When you have all that, you will have to say that we will trust you blindly. Important thing, however, is how much the Chinese are trusting Pakistan. If you again see this AidData analysis, this tells you that while on the surface, Pakistan's borrowings from China are $69 billion, which itself is $23 billion more than the World Bank figure, which means it's 50% more than the World Bank figure. The fact is that this still doesn't tell you the full truth, because the Chinese also have a lot of debt to Pakistan which is being rolled over. So this is short-term debt which does not feature in a country's balance sheet on a consistent basis or a long-term basis. That is like somebody lends you money for 6 months, then makes it for 9 months, then makes it for 11 months. At the end of financial year, again rolls it over. That is the game that, say, Indian banks have been playing in the past, particularly in the last 2 years of UPA government. That was called evergreening of loans. That is when you keep rolling over saying, okay, you can't pay me now, you can pay me another year. Maybe I'll increase your interest rate, or maybe I will even take a haircut on the interest rate because I know that you cannot pay. So why should I declare it as a bad loan and ruin my own balance sheet? Countries don't see it like that. Sovereigns see it as leverage. So I lent you money, you borrowed from me, you needed the money, you can't pay. That's all right. I understand, right? You can pay me later or whenever you can pay. Meanwhile, understand that I am the country for which your Prime Minister has to say, we will trust you blindly. That's how sovereigns get benefit or leverage or profit on the loans or support that they give to their needier partners or friends. And now, if you just look at Chinese money given to Pakistan as borrowings, 433 projects between 2000 and 2021, China has financed in Pakistan. Of the $68.91 billion that have been lent or that remain lent now, it's important to note that between 2012 and 2021, that is for 10 continuous years, Pakistan has received an emergency rescue each year from China. An emergency rescue usually would mean that I can't pay my bills, I can't service my debt, I can't pay for what I am buying. Please help me. So you get money as an emergency rescue. A lot of this emergency rescue is also a rollover of existing loans. The latest major rollover came in 2020 when it looked like Pakistan was on the verge of a default. You will find a lot of details on this research also in a story done by my young colleague Keshav Padmanabhan, of which I am sharing a link with you. You will also see a screenshot on your screens. Now, Keshav Padmanabhan has reached out and spoken to Uzair Yunus. He is director of Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council. He is also a wonderful writer and analyst in his domain. And if you want to read more from him, please go to pakistonomy.substack. I'm also sharing with you a screenshot of his Twitter page. In fact, he reached out to me after the India-Pakistan match in Ahmedabad because he had complaints about how the crowds behaved. And he also reflected the view that some of what happened in Ahmedabad made it sound like a bilateral India-Pakistan match instead of a non-partisan ICC tournament match. So he and I had a very healthy conversation about it. He's as passionate about cricket as all the rest of us, besides indeed the area of his domain. So he says in this story, Keshav Padmanabhan's story, he says, and I quote from him, in recent years, China has emerged as a key provider of funds along with Saudi Arabia and other multilateral partners like the World Bank and ADB. And then he also goes on to say that this is unsustainable. Now see what's been happening with the Chinese debt. Chinese debt, again, if you see the larger figures from this AidData analysis, they tell you the political content in the Chinese debt. Pakistan is a large recipient of Chinese loans, but only the third largest. Who are the other two? The largest is Russia. Between 2000 and 2021, the same period for which we are talking about Pakistan, Russia received $169 billion worth of Chinese loans. Pakistan received only 69 billion. So Russia is Pakistan plus $100 billion. Venezuela is the number two, $113 billion. That's a lot of money. This has coincided with a period when China's lendings through BRI have been declining. And once again, it's very interesting because if you see between 2000 and 2013, the Chinese have lent $412 billion for global or international infrastructure projects. By 2013, lending to these infrastructure projects was 66% of all of China's lendings overseas. That was $628 billion. Since BRI came up, this has come down. The percentage has come down from 66 to 31. What is the difference? Earlier, the Chinese would lend you money, go build this metro, go build this bridge and pay my money back. Now they say, all right, I will come and build your metro. I will come and build your highway. I will come and build your port. Hambantota, remember? I will come and build your airport. Then from the revenues that come, I will collect my money back. And somehow if I can't get my money back, I will treat what I built for you as a collateral and possess it. So that is the difference. So now the percentage of Chinese infrastructure loans after the arrival of BRI has become 31% of China's total lendings. Once again, see how China's debt patterns have changed as China's political ambitions have changed, because now debt for China began becoming very rich. By 2013, the pattern had begun to change, and that Xi Jinping rose at the same time is not entirely coincidental. So until 2013, what would be called as rescue lending, which is when a country is sinking, as Pakistan has been lately, when a country is sinking, another country goes and gives it emergency funding. That was only 5% of China's lendings overseas. Since then, between 2013 and 2013, it was 5%. Between 2013 and 2021, it became 58%. That is where the important fact arises that between 2012 and 21, for 10 years, Pakistan got one emergency loan, at least one emergency loan from China every year. That's the reason I said that this is not confined just to Nawaz Sharif years. Yet again, if you look deeper into this report, this tells you that 83% of all of China's rescue loans are rollover loans. So what's a rollover loan? I told you earlier that I give you this loan. Keshav Padmanabhan reached out to Bradley Parks, executive director of AidData, which has produced this research to understand this better. He quotes Parks as saying, and I quote, China's emergency rescue lending activities in Pakistan present both a measurement challenge and a reporting challenge, because many of the loans are entering the front door as short-term loans with maturities of 12 months or less and exiting the back door as long-term debts with de facto maturities in excess of 12 months. This is the issue of so-called rollover debt. So this is like a perpetual debt. And this is what the World Bank struggles with. And then Park goes on to say, and I quote again, rolling over debts with de jure maturities of 12 months or less year after year is effectively a loophole in international reporting rules that allows governments to underreport their true levels of public debt exposure to China and other external creditors. The World Bank is very much aware of this loophole and concerned. He adds, So this makes us understand this debt better. And once again, if you see all these rolled over loans also, so what was $69 billion actually becomes almost $102 billion. So Park again goes on to clarify the loans counted in the AidData report by saying, and I quote again, the loans that are counted by AidData but not by the World Bank include balance of payments loans from China Development Bank, ICBC, big Chinese institution, see the full name on your screen, Bank of China, and SAFE, which is State Administration of Foreign Exchange, as well as the State Bank of Pakistan's borrowings under its swap facility with PBOC, the Chinese equivalent of the Reserve Bank of India. Well, now the Chinese are past masters. In fact, Chinese are learning all the time on how to use their excess cash for political leverage. See what they did in the case of Argentina. So Argentinians got into trouble when time came to repay their debt to IMF, a tranche of their debt to IMF, because they were not able to pay it and they were going to have a default, and IMF would have imposed severe punishments on them, even if it just meant having to repay these loans despite their low foreign exchange holdings. So at that point, dollar holdings of Argentina's central bank, that is Banco Central de la República Argentina or BCRA, these were perilously low. And what happened? The Chinese PBOC, the Chinese equivalent of Reserve Bank, as I said, People's Bank of China, they stepped in and helped Buenos Aires service debt payments to IMF to the tune of $9.3 billion. So what did the Chinese do when they saw a very large country, a very important country in South America going through trouble, financial trouble? They went there and they said, we'll loan you money so you can repay the IMF. So Argentina owed the IMF $9.3 billion at that point. The Chinese lent the equivalent in renminbi yuan, their own currency. For clarity, Uzair Yunus in the same story tells Keshav Padmanabhan that this does not happen in case of Pakistan. And he says this is not how IMF lending works. In fact, Chinese rollovers and even access to Saudi funding are linked to the IMF program. And both the Chinese and the Saudis coordinate with the IMF when it comes to strategies that are necessary to maintain economic stability in Pakistan. It is clear that no two countries are exactly the same, but the larger trend is established, which is that the Chinese now have a lot of spare money. They built up enormous economic strength and enormous reserves. They are using that money to build economic, political and sovereign leverage across the world. But the most important focus of that money and Chinese activity remains in their neighborhood, be it Russia, be it Sri Lanka, or be it Pakistan. Now, finally, I told you I will give you some comparative figures. If you look at Pakistan's external debt to GDP ratio, in fact, if you see Pakistan's debt to GDP ratio, it's about 76.6%. That's all general government debt to GDP ratio, 76.6% in 2023. External debt to GDP ratio is 42.2%, which is quite high. Now, in comparison, India's is 19% or 18.8% or something. So 19%, just for comparisons. On the other hand, in our neighborhood, the real tiger in this business is Sri Lanka. The real tiger in this business is Sri Lanka. That is 74%. So external debt is 74% of Sri Lanka's entire debt. For Pakistan, it's 42.2%. For India, it's 19%. And you know what? It's a surprise. For Bangladesh, it's 11%. Bangladesh is now going to IMF for a fresh program. But as things stand, among the four major countries in the region, Bangladesh's external debt to GDP ratio is the lowest. Thinking about Chinese lending money to Pakistan and continuing to roll over these loans as Pakistan is unable to pay took me back to my favorite author, that's P.J. O'Rourke, and we've quoted from his book in the past as well. And this is his collection, Eat the Rich, where he's trying to explain global economy in many essays. One of these essays is written from Wall Street. And in this essay, he tries to explain the many financial instruments. Listen to what P.J. O'Rourke says about loans, lending and bonds. He says various companies such as Standard & Poor's provide bond ratings from AAA to D to help you estimate how safe your debt instrument is. A D-rated bond is like money lent to a younger brother. A AAA minus rated bond is like money lent to a younger brother by the Gambino family. Gambino family was one of the notorious 5 mafia families in America in that period. So if they lend you money, even if you're a younger brother, they'll come back and take you from it. The Chinese are the bigger brother in this equation. We know Pakistan is the younger brother. The Chinese keep lending money to Pakistan and rolling it over, knowing that Pakistanis will not be able to pay it back. But the Chinese knows ways to get value for that money. And that is why these debts, these Chinese debts are taken very seriously as political / sovereign / diplomatic / strategic instruments.